Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So the theme for today's show is our Sissified society. And let's start with some of the highest paid and most acclaimed people that are around today. Sports ballers. Let's see, this is from USA Today. Add J.R. Smith, Joel Embiid to the NBA players complaining about quarantine food. The biggest headlines from Disney World and the NBA bubble have been about the quarantine meals players are receiving, mostly because they look like food you'd get on an airplane. There's good news for them after they get through this, however, and we'll get to that. But let's start with more criticism about the food upon arrival. We'll begin with Joel Embiid, who was criticized by Kendrick Perkins for his concerns about health and safety in Orlando, and later flew to Florida in a full-body suit. He had some jokes about how he was going to lose weight during the restart. We head next over to J.R. Smith, who joined the LA Lakers and reunited with LeBron James. And there's a little video of him reading the food menu for the NBA campus, which is not safe for work, apparently. J.R. Smith is a national treasure. Imagine watching him pull this out on his Insta Live. Dude wasn't having it. And there's some sort of food in a bowl he does not like. Ben McLemore doesn't like it. However, McLemore's teammate, DeMar Carroll, called it solid cooking. This is also a good time to remind you that this won't be the food for the next few months there. According to USA Today Sports' Jeff Zilgett, executive chef Sean Loving, who has worked with USA Basketball, the Olympics, and other international competitions, will oversee a commercial kitchen where each team can provide one culinary staffer to help prepare additional meals. Also, the league has partnered with 6 restaurants: Del Frisco's, Joe's Crab Shack, Morton's, the Ocean Air, Palm, and Saltgrass to provide delivery service to team hotels. Those restaurants are part Landry's Inc., a restaurant, entertainment, and gaming company owned by Houston Rockets owner Tillman Fertitta. In addition, each team will have a culinary team on campus to provide meals. A personal chef can prepare meals off campus and have them delivered to players. Room service is available, and multiple restaurants at each of the 3 resorts where the teams are staying will have restaurants open. You remember all that talk about we're all in this together? Apparently, NBA players aren't prepared to rough it for a couple of weeks, despite pulling down their massive salaries. This is from the New York Post. Lakers' Rajon Rondo rips adequate NBA bubble hotel room, calling it a Motel 6. It's hard to imagine how Rajon Rondo developed a reputation for being moody. Upon arrival to the NBA bubble in Orlando, veteran Lakers guard Rondo, who has made more than $100 million in his 14-year career — I wonder how much he has left — trashed his accommodations at the Gran Destino Tower at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, comparing his hotel room to a Motel 6 in an Instagram post featuring a middle finger emoji. While millions of fans have been put out of work by the COVID-19 pandemic, Rondo, 34, was dismayed that this perfectly reasonable hotel room didn't meet the luxury standard NBA players have grown accustomed to. The teams have been divided into 3 hotels, with the highest seats put up at the Gran Destino. Yes, and he sent a picture of his room via Instagram. And it looks very much like the room that I was living in after I first moved into a hotel. I was in that room for, close to 2 months. It looks like it's got a king-size bed, and we can't see all of it, but it's a suite. It's quite large. Seems quite nice. In his second season with the Lakers, Rondo has averaged 7.1 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds, marking his lowest production since his 2006-2007 rookie campaign. Yes, just terrible, terrible sacrifices these B-ballers are having to make. Someone called Refutal at Twitter said those poor oppressed basketball players, they have to stay in hotels that resemble what pretty much every hotel I've stayed in for expensed business trips looks like. I cannot even fathom the horror they must be going through, almost as bad as Prison Ellen's mansion post. Yes, that would be Ellen DeGeneres complaining about the horrors of being stuck in her, I don't know, 12-bedroom, 18-bathroom with pool and patio. That compound. Yeah. I don't think that I don't really think that the NBA players really quite understand just how out of touch they are. I suppose, what, from the age of about 13 or so, they've been drooled over by adult males and told how special they are. But let's talk about a real tough guy here. Eminem. You remember him? He's the guy who, what was it, 13 times or whatever, he's recorded about raping a woman or killing a woman or raping and killing a woman, including his wife in front of his daughter. Yeah, that tough guy. Well, he has a new song out. It's dropped, as the kids like to say. This is from The Rap. Eminem went after bad cops, people who refused to wear masks amid the coronavirus pandemic, and New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees in his new co-single and first collaboration with Kid Cudi? I don't know. The Slim Shady of The Adventures of Moon Man and Slim Shady also sent prayers out to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery in his lyrically excellent, as always, verse. And let's see. Here's why don't we talk about his excellent verse? I had hoop dreams, now I shoot threes. What? Got a little green, yeah, but I don't do weed. Nope. Perp nor lean, nah, that's Tunichi, yeah. That's New Orleans, what? Fuck Drew Brees, yeah. And, oh, it gets better. Bunch of half-wits up in office, what? Half of us walking around like a zombie apocalypse. Other half are just pissed off and, yeah, don't want to wear a mask, and they're just scoffing. And that's how you end up catching the shit off I just used the same basket as you shopping, and now I'm in a fucking casket from you coughing. What a sissy. What a sissy. He's afraid of shopping baskets now. Yeah, that pretty much sums up the culture, doesn't it? Yeah, and ridiculous figure he is. When was it? In the 90s that this guy became famous? Because he was so outre. Was he 50 years old now? 55 years old now? Something like that? He's still at it. So, Major League Baseball is supposed to have a 60-game season, but there's all sorts of problems associated with that, not least of which is that, well, are the players going to show up? And how are they going to cross the border? So there's a site which I used to go to when there was baseball called Bluebird Banter, which is all about the Toronto Blue Jays. I have to say, despite all of the excellent information on the site, I was getting quite weary with it because it is quite possibly the most paused fan site that I have ever seen. So their story today, Jays to play 2 exhibition games in Boston. And the fellow who runs the site wrote, one of the worries I have about playing in a pandemic, being fair, it is one of roughly 300 worries, and this doesn't involve someone dying. Someone dying. Yes, these highly trained and extremely fit athletes in their 20s and 30s, they're going to die from COVID. Yeah, well, the players are going to be dying from what? Choking on their bubble gum? It's just absolutely shameful. If these people are so afraid of death, how is it that they even managed to get into automobiles? Because, People die in car crashes all the time. People get run over crossing the street. Oh, this is from Bleacher Report. More Blue Jays news. Blue Jays players have been informed that being seen outside their ballpark or hotel will be punished with a $750,000 fine and possibly jail time. Is this enough? I say no. Armed guards must be posted outside the Rogers Center and the players' hotels, and they should be ordered to shoot to kill any who should dare venture onto the street. We can never be too safe. And, oh, yes, lots of hugs and kisses out there for Buster Posey, catcher with the San Francisco Giants. Let's see, for the first time, this is from the Mercury News, for the first time in a decade, the Giants will open the season without star catcher Buster Posey in their starting lineup. Posey announced Friday he will sit out the 2020 season after he and his wife adopted identical twin girls. Posey said the girls were born last Friday and will need to remain in the neonatal intensive care unit for some time, so he and Kristen decided it was in the family's best decision to opt out of participating this year. Let's see, baseball players, the season lasts about 6 months, and I guess there's about a month of training before the season. They get 5 months off. And baseball players get paid an awful lot of money, but along with David Price and Ryan Zimmerman and possibly others, they've decided they don't owe any loyalty to their teams or their fans. And, oh, yeah. Well, of course, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL have gone all in on Black Lives Matter. And this could be the end of the line. College and professional sports had a great hustle, getting whites to pay good money to worship blacks. Now with Black Lives Matter, whites are expected to pay good money to be insulted and degraded. Let's see how that works out. The Z-Man, whose blog mentions that he writes about sports, although I haven't seen much about sports on his blog for quite some time. Perhaps this is the reason. He writes today, I was in the diner picking up my lunch and they had ESPN playing on the television in the main seating area. They used to have CNN playing during the panic, but that was when they were not allowed to seat customers. I'm pretty sure when they were allowed to seat people again, those people complained about CNN, so they changed it to something they thought was neutral. The lunch crowd at most places, especially old-fashioned diners, is going to be old and white. Of course, ESPN is now hate whitey all the time. I've not watched the channel in so long, I no longer recall when I last watched it. Probably a sporting event of some sort back in the before times. While I was there, they had a parade of famous blacks on to complain about white people. The absurdity of rich blacks moaning about racism is lost on the blacks, but I suspect it is not lost on whites. There were more than a few angry faces looking at the television while they chatted at lunch. It is hard to avoid your own bias in times like these, but I do wonder if our rulers have inadvertently created a problem for themselves by politicizing sports. Watching sports was the last refuge for white people. There is a pretty strong correlation between interest in sports and the politicization of society the last 3 decades. The Cold War ended, liberal democracy was let off the leash, and then everyone crowded into sports venues to escape the relentless spread of politics. Of course, with the long sports holiday due to the panic, one that could probably be extended through the year, that refuge does not exist. Lots of normal white people with only a passing interest in politics are now facing the grim reality of what America has become over the last few decades. The great doses of soma, that was the NFL, for example, are now going to be the opposite. Instead of putting Whitey in a trance, they will rub in his face the fact that he is now forced to wash their feet. Again, this could be my own bias at work. A year ago, I'd be looking forward to college football season. It was the last sport I watched with any regularity. I liked the traditions and variety. Now I have no interest. They could play the games in my front yard and I'd close the blinds. I've moved past disinterest into outright hatred of the whole sports entertainment world. The reason I hate is that they have decorated it with their vulgar and degenerate politics. Time will tell, but the magic of human society is that 20% of any population is the threshold for change. Self-identified progressives are 20% of American society, but they run everything. Muslims are about 15% of France now, and they are pushing around the natives. In both cases, they are well organized, but it just shows how a society can be ruled by a minority. If 20% of white people are red-pilled by the current race war, the nature of white people changes in a hurry. That's the Pareto distribution, 80-20. There's a further distribution, of course, the 20% of the 20%, which is a number of people who actively supported the American Revolution. It was only 4%, but that's all it took. So one would think that in the midst of this COVID panic, there would be certain organizations that would, maintain the old standards. Oh, sure, if you walk outside, you're going to die, probably sometime. But how about those people who have, sworn to protect their country, the military? This is from the Navy Times. The Navy is cutting physical fitness tests for the remainder of the year amid concerns about the spread of COVID-19, after already canceling the spring cycle of the physical fitness assessment in March. The COVID-19 situation requires that we continue to minimize risk to personnel. Therefore, all personnel will be excused from participation in Navy PFA Cycle 2 2020, according to a Navy administrative message. Suspension includes both the official body composition assessment and physical readiness test. Organized or group physical training will also remain suspended, although some exemptions apply for recruit training or unit mission training requirements. However, the Navy will start permitting sailors to conduct mock PFAs if they need to regain advancement and retention eligibility. Despite the pause, the hold on fitness test is no reason to stop working out, according to Vice Admiral John Noel Jr., Chief of Naval Personnel. COVID-19 may have shut down a lot of the base gyms, but there are a lot of exercises you could do at home. Stay in shape. This is the Navy. Are they going to social distancing? Are they going to practice this on their aircraft carriers, on their other warships, on their submarines? Well, obviously that's not possible, is it? This just seems like an excuse for them to justify more disgusting fat bodies in the service. And let's move on to, let's look at the chat first before we move into more COVID news. No, I'm not going to call it COVID news anymore. How about heedless panic news? By Goya. Yes, apparently the head of Goya said nice things about Donald Trump, and now he's the worst man in America. Jogakin666 says, press 1 if you'd like to listen to me do a BLM interpretive dance. That woman says everyone should buy Goya. Again, buy Goya to boycott the boycotters. Walrus Libertarian says, scrap sports ball. Well, as I've mentioned previously, I used to have a heavy intake of sports, and it's now, well, as of last year, it was down to the Toronto Blue Jays and the golf majors. And I don't know how paused golf is going to be. The Masters is never going to be paused. The Masters is even part of the PGA. And it is not run as a charity. It is run for profit. But Major League Baseball, yeah, they've gone all in. Imagine forcing people to wear masks outdoors. And what there's amusing or, how would I say, irritating incident the other day was someone in training camp hit a home run and decided, no, I'm not going to run the bases because running the bases could be dangerous. And he got away with it. And his fellow teammates thought it was amusing. Chocokin666 says, I always buy Goya, black beans, and yellow rice. Viva Goya. They have good frozen cassava, too, says that woman. Eminem should be in prison. I don't know whether he's ever done anything besides talking tough. What do you suppose is the last time Marshall Mathers actually did his own shopping, says Head McNeck. Yeah, I don't know. I saw this. I suppose I don't really spend much time reading about rich people and their lives. But Silicon Valley had an episode which featured personal shoppers. That the people go to the stores for you and they push around their carts and they buy the things you want. And apparently these personal shoppers are very touchy about the suggestion that perhaps, something has gone wrong with their lives. But I'm assuming these people are paid reasonably decently, and it doesn't sound like that bad a job. Now, I know that a lot of these celebrities or rich tech types are going to forget to put something down on the list, and then they are going to scream at you for not buying it. Remember to keep a hold of that list. Keep a hold of that list forever. Make a scrapbook if you have to, or keep the computer file. But most people in most jobs get yelled at from time to time. Visionary Companion says, that rivals the notorious BIG's My Mama Got Cancer in Her Breast, so don't ask me why I'm effing stressed. Ta-Nehisi Coates tells us this is evidence that BIG was a great poet. Oh, I want to say something about these rappers and their defenders that, yes, they're criticized for writing about violence and seemingly extolling violence. What about, the great, figures of literature in the past who've been involved in violence, or, great artists like Caravaggio or Christopher Marlowe or Francois Villon. Francois Villon wrote Paeans to the Virgin Mary. I'm not getting anything like this from the rappers. Their stuff is relentlessly plebeian. YT says, hello, friends. Happy White History Month. Is there such a thing? Okay. Fresh. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want anyone to be canceled for buying Goya. I don't know what Fresh Direct is. Jonathan Paul says, I was told apples never die. Apple computer products? Yeah, well, I was rather amazed when I learned about Apple that their terms and conditions are exceedingly stringent, especially about the kind of material that you put on your Apple product or any kind of a modification. If you annoy them in any way, they will turn your product into a brick, because if you read the terms and conditions, it turns out you don't really own any Apple product. Oh, Walrus Libertarian has a joke. Why don't the Chinese play baseball? Because they try and eat the bat. I love my utterly non-fashionable but highly functional and reasonably priced Asus Chromebook. I bought a Asus notebook. It was a combination notebook pad deal. I mean, you could separate it. I suppose it was cute enough, but it stopped working after about 4 months. It did not make a good impression on me. Okay, what else we have here? Visionary Companion says, remember when Henry Louis Gates justified Two Live Crew by quoting Robert Burns and mistaking Burns for Shakespeare? Gates thought My Red, Red Rose was an obscene sexual reference. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we would expect some black professor to know anything about a Scottish poet. I mean, their lives are just so much different. They have nothing in common whatsoever. Yada, yada. Anyway, what does Toby Young have to say? Okay, again, not a parody, okay? According to the New York Post, a new study out of Harvard recommends couples should mask up before having sex and not for kinky pleasure. Safe sex during the coronavirus pandemic might soon require protection beyond just the nether regions. A new study from researchers at Harvard University says that hooking up carries some risk for transmitting COVID-19 from one partner to the other, and recommends, among other practices, wearing a face mask while doing it. Yeah, the New York Post dropped the G. The research, published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, ranked frisky situations based on how likely it is to catch coronavirus while in the act. Researchers recommend wearing a mask for the riskiest sexual scenario, sex with people other than those with whom is quarantined. So we learned that the British government has wasted £10 billion on a track and trace scheme, which has been, well, abandoned. And in news, Sweden is virtually COVID-free. And there is a selection of, oh my God, what's wrong with you stories from the London Sun, the Financial Times, the New York Times, the Independent, the BBC, and the FP, Foreign Policy, I guess, that, oh, Sweden is just so grossly irresponsible. Sweden had, 704 cases last month. Swedish patients admitted to ICU last month. Well, as of July the 8th, 0. Sweden deaths by day last month as of July 8th, 0. How about that? Turns out the lockdown was not necessary. Not necessary at all. Hugo Rifkind, I remember him as a conservative cabinet minister. He's now apparently a humorist for the London Times. And Toby Young says that he's made a strong bid for the Bedwetter of the Week award in his latest column, entitled "In Your Face Rule Breakers Are Out of Control." Here's a taste. Looking at those pictures of the Soho crowds, however nationally atypical they may have been, I wonder myself, wondering how it happens. Is it like the wisdom of crowds, but the opposite? As in, is there a threshold of non-observance you need to reach before everyone else thinks, screw it, why be different? I'll have another drink and worry about potentially killing hundreds of people, including my own grandmother, tomorrow. We're all free to risk our own health by over-drinking or overeating or over scuba diving or whatever, but responsible behavior in a pandemic is not just about us. It speaks to a sort of social responsibility that is, or at least should be, literally one step up in civilized behavior. A commentator on this piece said the bottom line, Hugo, is that most people now know that COVID doesn't threaten them. They're not that worried if they get it. And the right to think that because the truth that the government doesn't like to publicize is that your chances of dying from COVID or even being seriously ill from it are minuscule unless you are in a very small subset of the population that is vulnerable. And it's that dawning realization that coronavirus isn't Ebola or smallpox or bubonic plague, combined with increasing suspicion that the authorities have both overreacted and been incompetent, that leads to a little rebellion and urge to regain control of your own decisions and risk assessment. And my guess is that the more the busybodies exhort people to wear a mask or keep your distance or keep working from home, the more likely it is they won't. It's the New York Post story. It's just sort of, it's the New York Post style is just sort of relentlessly trivial. How many double entendres can we work into a single story? Let's see. Alex Berenson is reporting some information from the World Health Organization. It's about masks. It's from last year. Guess what it says? It says that masks are not, they demonstrate a very low efficacy. Okay. And, but maybe it's because of that reason. Maybe it's because of that reason that we all have to wear them. Because, it's about humiliation more than anything else. Were these people wearing masks before? No, they were not. But now they're wearing them and everyone has to wear them. Someone wrote to Alex Berenson, I spent a couple of hours yesterday watching while my wife was doing errands of the people I saw wearing masks. I saw them touch them a lot, adjusting, pulling away briefly in the heat, temporarily taking off to one side so they could talk unmuffled. I saw people enter their vehicles, grabbing the mask and tossing it to the dash, draping off the rear view mirror or in the console area. I saw people exit their vehicles, pull masks from purses, pockets, diaper bags, etc. I saw some people with gloves. Most were the rubber nitrile type. Some looked like thin plastic food service serving gloves. Included behavior seen with the adjustment, talking, etc. I saw one woman pull hers up to her forehead as she got in her vehicle to drive away. The list goes on. The virus we are dealing with is out and about, vaporized in the air, living on various surfaces, as extremely contagious as purported. Yeah. We, right from the very beginning, going back to March, all of the problems with wearing masks. Are you wearing your mask properly? Well, if it's not difficult to wear a mask, I mean, if there's all these lists of do's and don'ts, well, then you have to understand that most people are not going to be wearing their masks properly then. Now, you wouldn't know that America is in the midst of a recession or quite possibly a depression, depending on how you look at the economic figures, because some people, it seems, would prefer to virtue signal themselves out of a job. Again, from the New York Post, Ford employees are prodding the company to stop making cop cars amid a nationwide uprising against police brutality. Ford staffers made the demand in a letter to Chief Executive Jim Hackett and Executive Chairman Bill Ford that was recently circulated at the company's Dearborn headquarters, according to news reports. Throughout our history, the vehicles that Ford employees design and build have been used as accessories to police brutality and oppression, the letter reads. As an undeniable part of that history and system, we are long overdue to think and act differently on our role in racism. The excerpt also says that a Minneapolis cop killed George Floyd, whose death sparked a massive wave of protests across the country. I don't think the New York Post needs to remind us of that. Next to a Ford police interceptor. The concerned employees reportedly want Ford to take action by July the 15th, or else what? In response, CEO Hackett indicated that Ford won't be getting out of the market anytime soon. While he condemned systemic repression and racism evident in some law enforcement encounters, Hackett said that the issues plaguing police credibility have nothing to do with the vehicles they're driving. No. I think that Ford should really put it to these people. We're going to keep making police vehicles. If you don't want to make them anymore, if you don't think that Ford should, we'll give you a nice buyout. We'll pay you, I don't know, 20 grand to go away, because I suspect that the people who are trying to bully Ford out of making police vehicles are the troublemakers in the company. These people don't want to do their jobs, and they still want to get paid. Why? They're just like teachers or government employees. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would like jobs at Ford. Let's see. The average salary of a assembler is $17.44 an hour, but that goes up to, the highest rate is $57.50 an hour. Engineers, average pay is $79,000 a year. Let's see. Production workers, average pay $16.82. That goes up to $57.50. Press operators, average salary $86,841 a year. That goes up to $115,000. Line assemblers, average pay is $21.06 per hour. That goes up again to $57.50. Technicians, $13.29 an hour. Utility workers, $65,000 an hour. Mechanics, $30,000 an hour. Quality control inspectors, $55,000 an hour. Again, I think there are many, many people who would be thrilled to get a job at the Ford Motor Company. So it seems that the Harper's letter bomb explosion is there's still aftershocks from this. And National Review decided to weigh in on this. And there's an editorial from them a day ago It's come to this. We must defend Matt Iglesias. Oh, for goodness sake, they're going to make us defend Matt. And there's, then there's characters indicating swear words. Iglesias. We can think of a dozen reasons to criticize Iglesias, but the Fox writer is currently under fire for signing a letter critical of cancel culture. For criticizing cancel culture, Iglesias might very well end up being canceled. All right. So, National Review is standing up for free speech. Is it? Well, they got to get their virtue signaling in there. Among the signatories are a few people who have seen the very pointy end of moralistic illiberalism. Salman Rushdie, who wrote a novel that won him a death sentence from Tehran. Khaled Khalifa, whose novels are banned in his native Syria. Garry Kasparov, a survivor of Soviet repression and target of Vladimir Putin's Gestapo. Oh, you mean the Garry Kasparov, who was elected to the Central Committee of the Komsomol, that is to say the Young Communists, as late as 1987? I've been trying to find out, I suppose it's embarrassing for all sorts of people, I've been trying to find out exactly how long Kasparov served on the Central Committee of the Komsomol. A survivor of Soviet repression. Oh, yeah. After all sorts of unpleasantness broke out where Gary was living, where did he flee to? He fled to Russia, and no good deed goes unrewarded. What did he run for president? He ran for office, and he did very, very poorly. He's not a Russian. He's not a Russian on his mother's side or his father's side, but he presumes to speak for Russia. I love that. Vladimir Putin's Gestapo. Oh, yeah. Well, where are the camps? Where are the camps? Concentration camps and the death camps. Too funny. But what about National Review's own? Oh, no, wait a minute. Let's see what Matthew Iglesias has to say. I'm trying to opt out of further letter discourse on Twitter, but since National Review offered this gross piece of behavior nominally in my defense, I feel compelled to say that I stand with Emily Vanderwolf, AJ Romano, Transcribe, and all my colleagues facing harassment. Your groveling will not save you from the mob, Iglesias. Yeah. Let's see. Michelle Malkin tweets, "Stop wetting your panties, Tattletale. I was dropped by National Review and Rich Lowry months ago after Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and Con Inc. tried and failed to ruin me. Now they all decry cancel culture. I'm grateful VDare has published my syndicated column for nearly 20 years." Once again, I like that Michelle Malkin woman. James Kirkpatrick writes, "History has proven Pat Buchanan and Peter Brimlow right about immigration, Joe Sobran right about the culture wars, Sam Francis right about anarcho-tyranny. Conservatism Inc. led crusades against all of them and more. The only interesting people on the right are those it purged." Oh, guess what? Valentina Sampaio is the first transgender Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. And Good Morning America is saluting this trailblazing model. Yeah. This is, I suppose, the ultimate in bait and switch. Let's, I want to buy the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue to get a look at the latest hot women. That's transgender. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for ruining my day. That this is why we can't have nice things. Not that the SI swimsuit issue pretty much, crossed the line to pornography some years ago when they started. Oh, these ones aren't wearing swimsuits. We've put paint on them instead, so they're actually naked. What Playboy put a transgender person on its cover. Look, They obviously don't know their business anymore. The whole point of Playboy is that men use it for a certain purpose, and if they realize that this is not a woman that they are using for this certain purpose, they'll stop buying the magazine, because the suggestion is, for both Playboy and Sports Illustrated, is how do we know that this woman is actually, as they say, a cis woman? Because now they have tainted everything they do. Get woke, go broke. I just want to mention something interesting, which is slightly off topic. But there is the Daily Beast reports on a new film from HBO. It's called Showbiz Kids, and it's about the sexual molestation of children, mostly boys, in the entertainment industry. Evan Rachel Wood, a former child actress who became a successful adult actress, says, "In my experience, I know a lot of kids that grew up in the industry, and what surprised me when I got older was finding out that pretty much all of the young men were abused in some way, sexually." This is written and directed by Alex Winter, of course, who you will remember from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and its delightful sequel. Yeah. Let's say the Daily Beast suggests, Joel Schumacher, he's dead now, okay? So Alex Winter was in The Lost Boys, and Alex Winter was molested on the set, so you can put two and two together. Of course, Keanu Reeves was Alex Winter's co-star in the Bill and Ted movies, including the one that's being filmed now. And Keanu Reeves was apparently raped as a teenager by one of the very most powerful and richest men in Hollywood then and now. And Oprah and Paul McCartney and all these people are very keen to get on this fellow's yacht. I won't mention his name because I don't want to be sued. So. Sissies. The Turks aren't sissies. Certainly not. This had been rumored for some days, and apparently it is true. This from NBC News. A Turkish President Erdogan reconverted Istanbul's Hagia Sophia into a mosque Friday, hours after a court ruled that a 1930s decision to make the iconic building into a museum had been unlawful. Yeah. And he says it's not going to make any difference. Like all of our other mosques, the doors of Hagia Sophia will be open to all, locals or foreigners, Muslims and non-Muslims. Typically, when you go to a museum, you're not segregated by sex, are you? Yeah. I don't know whether Ataturk's decision to secularize Turkey was ever going to work, because it created a void that was eventually going to be filled with something. I've often thought perhaps Ataturk should have gone whole hog and adopted some form of Christianity instead. Rabatkali responds to this, as expected. The old enemy, Turkey, the founding nation of modern genocide, will always be the enemy of our Lord Jesus Christ. And Arthur Bloom tweets, the Holy League, Alliance of Mutual Defense Against Islamic Imperialism in Europe, NATO, Alliance Enabling Islamic Imperialism in Europe. I had a request to talk about this piece from The Economist, and so I will. I suppose The Economist is the leading organ of neoliberalism. And James Burnham liked to talk about the planted axiom. That is to say that something which is simply assumed to be true in an argument, but it is not, in fact. It's rather similar to begging the question. And let's see. Let's start from the top. America's problem with racism can be divided into two parts. One contains all the myriad injustices that still blight African American lives a century and a half after the end of slavery. The other is the way that factions on the right, boo, exploit racial division as a political tool. An example of the first occurred on May 25th on a shabby street corner in Minneapolis when George Floyd was killed by a white policeman. Not proved, and we'll get to that a bit later. An example of the second occurred on July the 3rd at Mount Rushmore against the monumental backdrop of the country's greatest presidents when Donald Trump sought to inflame a culture war centered on race to boost his chances of a second term. To be successful, a campaign for racial justice needs to deal with both. Now, the planted axioms in this story are one, well, that such a thing as racism exists. It's not defined. And, the myriad injustices that still blight African American lives a century and a half after the end of slavery. You want to get into that? No, they don't want to get into it. There is very little in the way of data in this cover story in The Economist, and for good reason. Do we want to talk about the myriad advantages, statutory and otherwise, that African Americans enjoy in America? Do we want to talk about the fact that white Americans are generally terrified of blacks as a class? They are terrified of them physically, and they are terrified that their lives will be ruined if they are accused of anti-black racism. No, we don't want to get into that. No, we don't. And, I see. It was Donald Trump who sought to inflame a culture war centered on race. No. It wasn't Black Lives Matter. And what is this Black Lives Matter organization? Wasn't it founded by 3 women, 2 lesbians and a transsexual, something like that? And it really went off the rails in 2016 after that BLM supporter, killed 5 policemen in Dallas? But then someone dies in Minneapolis and suddenly it's all Black Lives Matter. It's almost as if this was contrived. Leaders like Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King used vigorous protest and relentless argument to push society towards their vision of equality of opportunity and equality before the law. Most Americans still hew to that classical liberal idea. Then why does America have affirmative action? But a dangerous rival approach has emerged from American universities. It rejects the liberal notion of progress. It defines everyone by their race. You mean like Black Lives Matter does? And every action is racist or anti-racist. Oh, no, Black Lives Matter goes further than that. All whites are racist, and there's nothing that whites can do about their racism. You see, this is sort of typical libertarian argument. Let's pretend that the world is not as it is. We'll argue from an ideal instead. The premise underpinning this ideology is correct, that racial inequality is shockingly persistent. And why might that be? Apparently, it's all a matter of process. It has nothing to do with patterns of behavior. None. This ideology also has some valid insights. Racism is sustained by unjust institutions and practices. What does that even mean? Seriously, what does that mean? Racism is sustained by unjust institutions and practices. Well, what does racism mean? Define examples of it, quantify this. And what are the unjust institutions and practices? Sometimes, as in policing, this is overt. More often, in countless small put-downs and biases, it is subtle but widespread and harmful. Oh, yes, microaggressions. Why didn't they use that word? That's what they're talking about. But then the ideology takes a wrong turn by seeking to oppose itself through intimidation and power. Yeah, that's generally how how institutions change. How elites are replaced through intimidation and power. Not the power that comes from persuasion and elections, but from silencing your critics. Oh, you mean the way that the neoliberals have attempted to silence the opponents of neoliberalism? attempted to silence the opponents or the proponents of Brexit, attempted to silence the supporters of Donald Trump. Oh, insisting that those who are not with you are against you. This is absolutely hilarious coming from the Economist. It is a worldview where everything and everyone is seen through the prism of ideology, as I suppose, opposed to the Economist, where everything and everyone is seen through the prism of materialism. Full stop. So let's see. Do they have some? Liberalism thrives on a marketplace of ideas, so diversity has a vital role. Yeah, and that's what we certainly see in the universities. That's certainly what we see in the corporations. That's certainly what we see in the media. Diversity in a marketplace of ideas. Liberalism does not fight power with power. No, of course it doesn't. That's why the army doesn't exist. That's why America hasn't, and other Western powers haven't gone on crusades throughout the world for democracy, converting people to the right way at the barrel of a gun. Oh, okay, so they have some ideas. Our briefing lays out what some of these policies might be. Top of the list is tackling the housing segregation that is central to America's racial economic equality. The reform of zoning laws, here we go, and the grant of rent assistance vouchers are the chief ingredients. Section 8 for everybody. You know those nice neighborhoods that people like to move to, the white people like to move to nice neighborhoods because they have good schools? Say farewell to that. This would improve public services and lessen violence. Yeah, absolutely. More integrated housing would integrate schools too. And given America's locally financed education, mean that more money would be spent on Black children. Black school districts are the most highly remunerated in America. Again, some figures would have been useful here. Affordable measures, including advice and modest cash grants, have been shown to boost graduation from college. Oh, so you're going to give Black students money to show up, to get C's? A third tool is the tax system. The earned income tax credit tops up wages of working adults. Yeah, that's how places like McDonald's and Walmart can pay their employees not enough money for them to get by, and Uncle Sucker, that is to say the middle class, comes through with the rest. A child allowance would cut poverty. A baby bond would help shrink the wealth gap. More welfare state. The welfare state, certainly the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson has been an abject failure, but of course, you need more welfare state. In the past, liberals have helped bring about change when a society faced a challenge to the status quo, or when reforms limited child labor and won women the vote. If America has reached such a moment today, it must not resort to identity politics and suffer intolerance, intimidation, and division. Instead, for reform on race that works, it must look to liberalism. Well, the liberalism that the Economist has been associated right from the very beginning, again, is materialism, pure and simple. It doesn't matter whether society is going to hell in a handcart. Let's just look at the GDP instead, because the GDP is our savage god. Jim Kunstler has a particularly good column today. Tired of getting mau-maued by the woke inquisition? That's what it is, of course, a supercharged shakedown operation utilizing all the medieval tools of maximum mindfuck to hustle the USA out of its own existence. The animating principle of Black Lives Matter is not justice, but coercion. And not just coercion, but the sadistic pleasure of inflicting pain, injury, and humiliation in the process of extracting money and power. The tools are violent insurrection, bad faith, and unconditional dishonesty, applied like thumb screws, strappados, and red-hot irons to a nation reeling from the dislocations of pandemic virus and a financial implosion. Now, several weeks out from the June uproars of looting and burning, The true shape of this racist jackery is plain to see. They are the shock troops of the desperate and demented Democratic Party. The smoldering ruins of Minneapolis and Santa Monica are the party's policy platform. The Seattle CHOP is its shining city on a hill. Not everybody in the land has gone insane, of course, and not everyone will keep going along with the hustle. The news media war chiefs of the woke inquisition, the New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC, are working overtime to terrorize the public into renewed COVID-19 hysteria, with the bonus of further destruction to America's daily business by instigating new lockdowns. The nation's economy was already in enough trouble. The question now is, how will a responsible political establishment manage contraction? The woke inquisition's answer is simply to extend looting operations to whatever isn't nailed down. The woke inquisition is like the parasitic wasp larva trying to eat its way out of a plump caterpillar, leaving nothing but a husk behind. It goes for the brain first and then for the guts. Who is not impressed by the mindlessness of this vicious rabble? There's no evidence at the core of their complaint that police nationwide are hunting down black men. If anything, black men are hunting down each other and are oblivious to the collateral damage of infants and children blown away in their shoot-ups. Defund the police and tie their hands behind their backs? Well, the results are already in for that. Huge increases in homicide rates in Chicago, New York, Houston, Baltimore, Kansas City, Newark, Nashville, etc. Overwhelmingly black on black crime. Leading naturally to the linchpin of wokesterism. It's Whitey's fault. Whitey is racism incarnate. White fragility makes redemption impossible. No amount of penance, apology, or remediation can fix it. Which raises another question. Why even bother entertaining reparations for slavery? It will never be enough. Which may be exactly why the woke inquisition's real aim is to undermine all of America's institutions and then bust up the republic. The petulant resistance that dug in after Hillary's shocking 2016 election loss did the groundwork by enlisting the FBI, CIA, NSC, DOJ, and other federal agencies into seditious intrigues that made the federal apparatus of justice look and act corrupt and untrustworthy. Everything about the Mueller inquiry was an exercise in bad faith and perfidy, leaving the engines of official justice so broken that their misdeeds can barely be corrected, let alone prosecuted. To this day, the lawfare cadres sponsor the continued persecution of General Michael Flynn months after the DOJ formally dropped its case against him. Do you suppose these turpitudes don't rankle the substantial number of citizens who still refuse to be driven insane by the woke terror? And who is the figurehead leading this Democratic woke party wrecking crew of coercion? The empty shell of Joe Biden, a bumbling senator turned grifting vice president, now a mere hologram of a candidate. The renewed campaign of COVID-19 hysteria and the woke press may be just a psyop to stuff poor Joe back in his basement and make sure he stays off public view. They took him out for a brief airing yesterday in Pennsylvania, a low-grade fiasco. In a formal speech, Biden said, quote, "So today I'm releasing a blueprint. I think the press had how to create millions of good-paying union jobs using Protestant technology that we need now and in the future," unquote. Protestant technology? What could that be? Sounds like another one of Whitey's endless tricks. After the speech, some media cornered the candidate beside a campaign limo. He managed to decline taking any questions and waddled stiffly away, glassy eyes, his hands strangely splayed like seal flippers. Another symptom? Who are they kidding with this pathetic wind-up mummy, this bare ruin of a crooked old pole? What treacherous game are they playing now? What's next? Well, yeah, this is a slippery slope argument. What's next? That the Democratic Party has decided that a man who was already senile and getting more so by the day, everyone loves Joe Biden. He did all those great things in the Senate and as vice president. Don't believe any of those stories about corruption. And he's just folksy. And, folksy people, they forget what state they're in, or what day they're in, or what office they're running for, and can't read things off cue cards. Yeah, there's nothing unusual about that. But let's get back to George Floyd. CyberPsy tweets, reading the transcript for the arrest of George Floyd, the guy was drugged out of his mind, foaming and bleeding at the mouth, saying he couldn't breathe before anyone touched him. The cops called EMTs after commenting repeatedly that he seemed impaired. Charges will be dropped. Floyd seemed to be on the verge of dying before going to the ground. A cop even mentions that he looks as if he's about to have a heart attack. The meth and fentanyl in his system played a much more convincing role in his death than we knew before. I'm about 90% certain that the charges against the officers will be dropped, and even more certain that the country will fall to pieces afterwards. This latest conspiracy theory going around is that Keith Ellison, who is the Muslim radical, who is known to be, because he's told us so, a supporter of Black Lives Matter, has deliberately overcharged Chauvin and the other policemen because he wants the prosecution to fail, because he wants the United States to be reduced to ashes. And let's see, the New York Times has printed Defense Exhibit number 2, which is the transcript. And he keeps talking about getting shot by a policeman before. He's obviously out of his mind. Put your foot back in. Floyd says, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. God dang man, I got shot the same way, Mr. Officer, before. Okay, well, when I say, let me see your hands, you put your fucking hands up. Floyd says, I'm so sorry, Mr. Officer. Dang, man. I got shot like that, Mr. Officer. It was the same thing. I don't know what he's... Perhaps he was hallucinating that he was Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin or something. I just lost my mom, man, he says. He is resisting arrest repeatedly. And as I say, there's a transcript here of the cops noticing you got foam around your mouth, you're acting a little erratic, and the fear that he was going to die on the spot even before the knee went on his neck. Of course, there's always the possibility that these cops are simply going to be railroaded, like James Fields was in the state of Virginia. Of course, the trial of James Fields was exceedingly dodgy for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is that Fields' lawyer didn't seem to be particularly interested in defending him. I rather suspect that the lawyers for Chauvin and the other cops will be much, much better. But what do we see? The same thing in the Flynn case. These lawyers that Flynn hired seem to be working for the prosecution. I wonder how often this happens in political cases. Let's talk about hurt feelings and sissification. Police in a San Francisco Bay Area city, that would be Martinez, California, are investigating who is responsible for illegally painting White Lives Matter on a street. The same day, prosecutors announced charges against 2 people accused of defacing a city-sanctioned Black Lives Matter sign. Martinez police received a call Tuesday about the white letters on a road, said Lieutenant Mike Estanol, a Martinez police spokesman. Officers arrived to find a female painting over the letters with black paint. Shocking hate crime. Neither the person who painted White Lives Matter or her should be painting on the roadway. We've just had 2 weeks. What is it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of thousands, tens of thousands of Americans defacing public buildings, spray painting, whatever, everything on the street, on every available surface, while the cops sat on their hands. But yeah, put White Lives Matter on the street and you're in serious trouble, pal. Because it's kind of like the N-word, White Lives Matter. That you say that and it has magic power. That it alternately reduces people, black people, to hysterical weeping, or alternately foments a murderous but justified rage in them. Let's see, this is from The Spectator, again from Toby Young. Layla Moran, the Lib Dems education spokesman. She's the person who got involved sexually with a female campaign worker, and there was questions about money spent, illegal use of funds. And then after the election, she announced that she was, gender liquid or non-binary or some such thing. The Lib Dems are just, you may think that the Labour Party is bad, but the Lib Dems are typically just nuts. But anyway, she's written to Gavin Williamson, urging him to do something about systemic racism in schools. Changes to the history curriculum, such as learning about non-white historical figures and addressing the darker sides of British history, honestly, are a vital first step to tackling racism in our education system, she wrote. This chasm in information only serves to present students with a one-sided view of history. And again, well, the obvious response, which Toby Young makes, is like, has she been paying attention? What do they teach in school other than, how to do homosexual things and anti-sexism and anti-racism? And here's someone you've never heard of. And until, a year ago, no one had ever heard of this person, but this person is one of the most important people in our country's history. I wonder how many of you have heard of the Proms, or the last night of the Proms in particular. It's a British tradition that began how long ago? Roughly 100 years ago, let's say. More than that, a little more than that. Or, yeah. So it used to be called the Promenade Concerts, or the Henry Wood Promenade Concerts. Now it's known as the Proms, or the BBC Proms. It's a series it lasts for about 2 months, and there are hundreds of concerts, most of them at, the Royal Albert Hall and Cadogan Hall, some of them in public. All sorts of music. It's classical music, but solo recitals, chamber music, orchestral. They bring in musicians and conductors, soloists from all over the world, and it is exceedingly popular. It's mostly highbrow music that they play, but the last night of the Prom is a particular British tradition, and it's a occasion for patriotism. That the people who attend, they often wear funny costumes, and they wave Union Jacks, or they have Union Jacks on their clothing, this sort of thing. And it's a big party. It's a big party. Well, it's a patriotic party, and every last night of the Proms ends the same way, although there have been some variations. Rule Britannia, and then Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance March number 1, which is then followed by the hymn based on it, Land of Hope and Glory, and then Hubert Parry's musical version of Blake's poem Jerusalem, and then the national anthem, and then Auld Lang Syne. Well, people seem to like it, but not all people seem to like it, and I think that you can guess why. This is from the Daily Mail. One of BBC's own columnists has called for Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory to be scrapped from the corporation's last night of the Proms concert because they are, quote, crudely jingoistic, unquote. Richard Morrison, who studied music at Cambridge University and has been a BBC Young Musician of the Year judge, used his column in the BBC Music magazine to claim that it would be insensitive, bordering on incendiary, to chant the nationalist songs this year in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. He took aim at the traditional and popular patriotic pieces and called for a toe-curling, embarrassing, anachronistic farrago of nationalistic songs to be replaced with a more reflective finale, which doesn't provoke offense or ridicule, but stops short of proffering any suggestions. I don't know. Perhaps some of Britain's greatest living composers, those engaged in the grime movement, could come up with some ditties about stabbing, which seems to be the new British national sport. Let's see. Instead, the BBC should transform the Proms finale so that it reflects the attitudes of its 21st century performers and audiences, not their Edwardian predecessors. The columnist sparked a furious backlash with Tory MP Philip Davis branding it extremist virtue signaling views. This is the kind of metropolitan left-wing politically correct drivel which is so prevalent at the BBC that makes it so out of touch with the country at large. Flag-waving crowds will be absent from London's Royal Albert Hall during this year's socially distanced summer season of concerts due to the coronavirus outbreak. They're doing this virtually. Given the number of DVDs that are available, given the number of YouTube videos where you can watch previous last nights of the prom with audiences. Remember audiences? Yeah, I remember audiences. Morrison said, when I look around me, particularly the people sitting in the posh seats, whom I've never seen at any other proms, no, sadly, they didn't appear for Schoenberg or Scriabin recitals, and realized that I can detect absolutely no sign of irony as they roar out these crudely jingoistic texts. On the contrary, they seem to mean every single word. And even if they don't, what comes across to the worldwide TV audience is a stereotype of Little England that was already being lampooned when I first went to the proms half a century ago. Well, if this fellow Morrison is familiar with, say, Gilbert and Sullivan's operas, if he has the intelligence to understand that these operas are both a lampooning of England and a celebration of England. I suppose that's too ambiguous for Morrison. Obviously, the people who attend the last nights of the proms in their silly costumes know that this is a lampoon, but it is a loving one. With massed choirs and a packed flag-waving audience ruled out on medical grounds, there will never be a better moment to drop that toe-curling, embarrassing, anachronistic farrago of nationalistic songs that concludes the last night of the proms. And I don't mean drop them just for this year, I mean forever. They form a kind of unholy trinity: Jerusalem, Land of Hope and Glory, and Rule Britannia. Jerusalem I can just about endure, although I think that the questioning, almost incredulous nuances of William Blake's words are being massively misunderstood if they are hurled out like a football chant. But the other two, each year I try to convince myself that they're being performed ironically. That's as much as I'm going to read from this quisling. You see, in any crisis, whether real or no, the scum always rises to the top. Blacks are less than 4% of the population in Britain, and they have contributed nothing to British culture. Nothing at all. But apparently, singing Rule Britannia is going to offend them somehow. I'll let you in on a secret. There's probably about 17 people, black people, who go to the proms, any of them. They're not interested in that kind of music, and there's no necessity for them being interested in that kind of music. Let's see. Rule Britannia comes from the poem by James Thomson, who also wrote The Seasons, which you all know was famously set to music by Haydn, one of his greatest compositions. Rule Britannia was set to music by Thomas Arne. And yes, he also wrote A Hunting We Will Go. And let's see, who wrote these other things? Land of Hope and Glory, of course. The music is from Edward Elgar, one of the greatest tunes ever written, and the lyrics are by A.C. Benson, one of the famous Benson family members. Of course, Jerusalem is by Blake, and Hubert Parry wrote the music, which was orchestrated again by Elgar. Perhaps when Britain's blacks come up with men of this stripe, then they can start throwing their weight around. But I suspect that we'll have quite some time to wait for that. I don't, if black people want to pretend to be offended by songs which they never hear and don't understand, well, I suppose that's fine. But this Morrison fellow has no such excuse. He simply hates Britain and England in particular, and for that reason, he has been well rewarded by the quislings that run that country. Well, this is interesting. Apparently, Donald Trump is responsible for, America burning down, just like he's responsible for people dying of COVID-19. This is from Revolver News. According to a poll conducted by the Democracy Institute, 59% of the American people support Trump's handling of the protests and riots, with 45% even going so far as to say Trump has not been tough enough. And let's see, according to a poll conducted by Monmouth, 70% of Americans believe that the Black Lives Matter movement has not improved race relations, with 38% even saying they've made race relations worse. So once again, I run into the same problem that everyone has. Where do I get my news? Well, I get my news from the mainstream media. And you can say, oh, what about these alternative outfits? Well, what the alternative outfits are pretty much doing is commenting on mainstream media news, because actually reporting news costs a lot of money. I'm not talking about, reporting on government, because what reporters so-called now do is they simply paraphrase government press releases. But we have a scandal in Canada involving Princess Rockstar, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And I mentioned this a few days ago, this We Charity, the Kielburger brothers, and I have to be very careful about what I say about them because they are exceedingly litigious. But it turns out that large sums of money were going from this charity to Justin Trudeau's mother, Margaret Trudeau, and his brother, Alexander. I'm not going to call him Sasha. Why would Justin Trudeau's mother need the money? Well, I would suspect that her ex-husband, Pierre Trudeau, cut her out of the will. They had a bitter divorce after she humiliated him sexually in public by carrying on with one or more members of the Rolling Stones at Studio 54 and elsewhere, and being photographed with her skirt hiked up to her hips, and she was not wearing any underwear. Wacky woman. They divorced shortly after this, and Trudeau got custody of the children. Of course, Justin has an awful lot of money. He could give his mother money, but he prefers for the taxpayer to give her money. And she has a speaking career. What does she talk about? She talks about being crazy. Yeah, that's right. That's pretty much it. Now, my old friend and colleague, Lauren Gunter in The Sun, he writes, "We scandal likely won't stick to Justin Trudeau, just as other ethics violations haven't." Lauren is a good guy, but I really hate this meta style of journalism. The story hasn't even stopped unfolding, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. I don't know. How about you leave out the meta, and we'll decide how many people care. Because it turns out that there's been lying involved here as well about, whether various Trudeaus had been compensated. This all came about because this We Charity was going to be in charge of a $900 million program, which was supposedly going to train cadres, young cadres. I don't know, perhaps Canada's own Red Guards, although we seem to have enough volunteer Red Guards. Matthew McBain commented on Twitter, "The CBC concludes the reason Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister before Trudeau, wasn't trading $900 million government contracts for speaking gigs for his mom is that no one ever asked." Aaron Wary, who is a top Canadian political reporter and a buffoon, he actually wrote this. One other odd thing about two of these episodes, the Aga Khan and We, is how you can trace them back to Trudeau's own unique life and status. Stephen Harper didn't have to worry about getting invited to the Aga Khan's island, and his mother and brother weren't celebrities. Well, first of all, Trudeau's mother and brother are not celebrities, or you might call them D-list celebrities. The Aga Khan, Trudeau accepted tens of thousands of dollars worth of hospitality from the Aga Khan, who is the leader of the Ismaili Muslims and who has a huge presence in Canada and is a major political mover. And he managed to weasel his way out of this. Just like he manages to weasel his way out of appearing in blackface half a dozen times, because the rules don't apply to him. Here's a perhaps more serious, much more serious story about Canada. And again, this is, America, you do not want to become Canada, okay? But when you see something is happening in Canada, you know that the push is coming in the United States, because we're the canary in the coal mine. This is from the National Observer. Canada's Attorney General and Federal Health Minister say they welcome the call for Canadian police chiefs to decriminalize drugs for simple possession as the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified the opioid crisis. Keep in mind, marijuana is legal from coast to coast in Canada. So what kind of drugs are we talking about here? Vancouver Police Chief Adam Palmer, president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, said July 9th that the tide is turning, with a new generation of law enforcement now acknowledging that arresting people for drug possession isn't effective and does not save lives. We are here today to officially state that the CACP recognizes substance use and addiction as a public health issue. Being addicted to a controlled substance is not a crime and should not be treated as such. So I guess that, the next time that someone is leaning against your front door and shooting up, don't bother calling the police, because they're not interested. They're not interested anyway. But now they're saying that, yeah, let's legalize everything. Let's legalize everything and I'll explain why. Okay. The police chiefs said in a report that the compelling case for change had been made by public health officials addressing the opioid crisis, which killed over 15,000 Canadians between January 2016 and December 2019 and continues to kill. In BC, far more people have died this year from illicit drug overdoses than from COVID-19. By mid-June, BC had recorded 554 deaths from illicit drugs compared to 186 deaths from coronavirus as of Thursday. Yeah. So we have all this problem. We have a very, very serious problem in Canada of people fatally overdosing from illegal drugs. The solution? Let's not have them be illegal anymore. Seriously, that is the solution. So if the rape and murder statistics go haywire, is the government going to suggest that Canada should no longer make rape and murder crimes? Perhaps they should be regarded as public health issues. I mean, racism apparently is a public health issue. Why shouldn't rape and murder be considered public health issues? Because rape and murder certainly affect the health of a great many members of the public. So I don't know, maybe it's some time for some blue sky thinking on that as well. Just to give you a little more information about this, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's mother, Margaret, and his brother, Alexandra, have both been paid tens of thousands of dollars to appear at We charity events. In charity, I thought the whole point of charity was you did things for free. In response to an inquiry from CBC News, We Charity has provided details of the speaking fees paid to both. Let's see. Margaret Trudeau spoke at approximately 28 events and received honoraria amounting to $250,000. This is over a period of 4 years. Alexandra spoke at 8 events and received approximately $34,000. Alexandra is best known as an apostle of China. Don't you just love China? We need to get closer to China. We need to be more like China. Yeah, I don't know. The Trudeau family is rich, but they just can't stop themselves. You know, they just look, there's the cookie jar. And, you know, we have control of the cookie jar. We were elected to, you know, oversee the cookie jar. And, oh, look, someone took the lid off the cookie jar. I mean, come on. There's lots and lots of cookies. We can take out a few cookies here. They'll just add more cookies. I mean, what's the big problem? A strong majority of Canadians believe the RCMP has a problem with systemic racism, but they are divided on whether they have confidence that the force can fix it, according to a new poll conducted by Nanos Research for the Globe and Mail. Yeah, 75% say that Canadians, the RCMP has a problem with systemic racism. It's meaningless. It's manufactured consent. What does systemic racism mean? No. What does it mean? Canadians have been told to say this, and so they say it. It's that simple. I believe in free speech. I'm rather a free speech absolutist, but I've long considered the possibility that we would be much better off if political polling were banned, especially during election campaigns. Typically in Canada, it's something like a 35-day period. In the United States, it never ends. But, you know, a similar thing could be possible in the United States, because the whole point of these polls is to tell people, well, that guy's going to win, so you should vote for that guy. Or don't waste your vote on a third party. That would be foolish. Or, you know, that thing that no one had ever heard of until last week? Apparently, people have very strong feelings about it. No, they don't. No, they do not. There's a few topics on which, you know, polling has been consistent and is useful. If you want to look at the death penalty, if you want to look at abortion, and I'm sure there are a couple of other things, we have a very good idea of how people think. But in terms of systemic racism, what is that? Does that mean killing black people? Yeah, police killing black people, you know, because I'm against that. So I guess I'm against systemic racism. The head of the RCMP is facing backlash from some rank and file members over her recent statements acknowledging the existence of systemic racism within the force. In an internal email leaked to the Toronto Star, some members say they feel betrayed by Commissioner Brenda Lucky's comments and worries that her statements have opened us up to more danger, hate, and criticism. What happened here is that she was asked, does the RCMP have a systemic racism problem? And she said, no, I don't think so. And then Jagmeet Singh and the media said, how dare you? How dare you? How dare you? She said, okay, all right, systemic racism, definitely. But Douglas Kwan of the Toronto Sun managed to find someone who strongly disagreed with this, that definitely there is a very, very serious problem of systemic racism, and it was a sociology professor from an Ontario university whose name was Abdul Makdu Akram or something, which is a big shock. Who would ever? Oh, before I get to the book club, okay. Cop linked to Bill Horace homicide pleaded guilty in 2016 to internal police charges, court documents. New information has emerged about a Toronto police officer charged in connection with a London, Ontario homicide investigation. Court documents show Constable Trevor Gregory pleaded guilty to internal police charges in 2016. He was arrested by London police on July the 7th and charged with breach of trust in relation to the June 21st death of Bill Horace, an alleged former Liberian warlord from Toronto. Court documents obtained by Global News show the breach of trust charges in relation to misleading a police officer to obtain unauthorized information. The documents say the alleged breach of trust occurred on or about June 20th, the day before Horace's death. Gregory is the father of 22-year-old Kieran Gregory, who is still at large and wanted on a second-degree murder charge in the shooting of Horace. The court documents show Trevor Gregory pleaded guilty to neglect of duty and insubordination after a woman he arrested overdosed on pills. Okay, so what is the connection here? All right. Horace, the 44-year-old victim, was an alleged member of the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, a rebel group that fought in the country's civil war in the 1990s. He had been investigated by Canadian officials for alleged war crimes, but insisted he was innocent. By the way, not a Canadian citizen. So what's the connection here? Well, at this time, we do not believe that any of Bill Horace's alleged acts in relation to the uprising in Liberia have anything to do with this investigation, said Detective Superintendent Chris Newton. We believe that in the days and weeks previous to the homicide, Horace and Gregory and others had some business dealings, and those business dealings relate to what occurred on June the 21st. So a Toronto cop and his son are involved in a business relationship with a Liberian warlord. And I guess this relationship must have gone south, because it would seem that the Toronto cop got a hold of information that he was not authorized to get. And then a day later, this warlord ends up dead. Toronto is just such a fun place this day. It really is. Now, I am going to get to the book club here in just a second here. Very foolishly, and I apologize, this will take about 15 seconds. I neglected to actually open the book on my computer, but there it is, by Ron Hansen. And the book is called The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. Now, of course, Jesse James and Robert Ford were real people. And I was thinking that Jesse James had a huge fan club, as it were, in the late 19th century. And many such examples in American history of bad people getting public adulation. You see in recent times, the Manson gang, they had a lot of public adulation. What the Weather Underground did. You could look to Black Lives Matter today. That they're outlaws. They're members of the oppressed. They're standing up for the little guy. Of course, there's very little evidence that Jesse James was particularly interested in the little guy. This book was published in 1983. It was later made into a movie in 2007, which I haven't seen, starring Brad Pitt as Jesse James and Casey Affleck as Robert Ford. Ron Hansen is a distinguished and highly praised American novelist. He is author of a book called Desperados, which is about the Dalton Gang. Actually, he is from Nebraska. Ron Hansen is a Nebraskan, so he has a particular interest in subjects, in stories that took place, in his area of the country. Mariette in Ecstasy is another one of his books. Hitler's Niece, Atticus, and The Kid, which is about Billy the Kid. He is a professor at a Santa Clara University, where he is the Gerard Manley Hopkins S.J. Professor in the Arts and Humanities. Now, the Jesse James saga could be regarded as a continuation of the American Civil War. That if you look at the time before the Civil War, bloody Kansas, that you see this ferocious dispute between what came to be known as the Jayhawkers and the Bushwhackers. And the Jayhawkers were the Nebraskans who were fanatically opposed to slavery. And the Bushwhackers were alternately, depending on how you want to look at them, they were simply the mirror image of the Jayhawkers, or alternately, they were simply attempting to defend their fellow Missourians from the depredations of the Jayhawkers. And we see during the Civil War on the periphery the activity of such like so-called Captain Quantrill. And he was best known for these massacre at Loris, Kansas, where 150 men, including many boys, were killed in cold blood. This is what went on in Missouri and in Kansas during the Civil War is essentially not war, traditional war. It's terrorism, pure and simple. And Jesse James was a bushwhacker, as was his elder brother. And particularly Jesse James saw himself after the war as seeking to avenge the South, avenge the Confederate cause. This is a historical novel, and it includes, well, a great deal of fact. It includes a great deal of contemporary newspaper reports. And as I said a few weeks ago, if you read a book like this and see what was printed in American newspapers, in the 1880s, and you compare it to what is printed in American newspapers today, and then you compare the education levels of Americans today to Americans in the 1870s and the 1880s, I know that correlation is not causation, but, it could be argued that college education, university education has made Americans, and not just Americans, stupider and more ignorant. I'll give you an idea here of some of the, the back and the forth of the atrocities. And of course, the Jesse James was formed a gang with the Younger brothers. They were known as the James Younger Gang, and they sowed terror throughout America. If you look at James' peregrinations, literally from California to the Atlantic seaboard. But here's a passage from the novel. Jesse introduced Cole and Jim and Bob Younger to her in Kearney, and she sat through a meal and several foul cigars with the four before she excused herself to walk on the lawn in her sweater so she could hear silence and take in the dark like a sedative and become somehow less alive. Jim and Bob were fine, cordial and slender and irresistible, but Cole was a red-haired beef of a man with sideburns and a horseshoe mustache, even more boisterous and extroverted than Jesse, a twin to him in his facial features, and the two in combination were so electric and incandescent, Z felt slow and shut in and scorched. Z is the woman whom Jesse finally married after a courtship of about a decade. And Cole was cruel. He fetched the viciousness in Jesse. He boasted with sayings like, "I cooked his hash," and frightened Z with a Civil War tale about 15 Jayhawkers he tied belly to belly, back to back in a row in order to test an Enfield rifle at close range. Cole's first shot bore into 3 men instead of the 10 he intended, and he had commanded, "Cut the dead men loose. The new Enfield shoots like a pop gun." He needed 7 shots to slaughter all 15 and said he reverted to the Army Springfield 45 from then on. Jesse listened with cold-blooded admiration as if he'd had a rather intricate mathematics problem broken down on a blackboard. Z brooded on how Howard and deserted the last man killed must have been. hearing the rifle detonations and the moans of the Kansas soldiers, sustaining the lurch and added strain of cadavers on the ropes as execution moved toward him, a body at a time. And she would remember later that Cole mentioned the robberies of the banks in St. Albans, Vermont, where Confederate soldiers in civilian clothes showed their grit by getting the money in broad daylight and walking right out into the street. She would remember that because of a St. Valentine's Day newspaper account about two men in soldiers' overcoats who'd robbed the Clay County Savings Bank in Liberty, Missouri, and ridden off with 12 accomplices into a screaming snowstorm. The Jesse James in this novel is a rather otherworldly figure. And perhaps one could argue that the popular adulation that was given him then and now is due to this fact that somehow, I don't know, through collective unconscious, if you will, that Americans realized that that Jesse James was unique. He had suffered greatly as a young man. He had suffered grievous wounds and had been given up for dead at one point. He shrunk down to almost nothing. But then he gained his strength back, and he fought the whole world. He fought the whole world. In this novel, he is as I say, a kind of mystical figure who seems to have the gift of clairvoyance, that he can read people's minds or he can read people's souls, that he knows the plans of others, perhaps even before they have planned them themselves. And of course, it's curious that you run into a couple, perhaps, atheists in this book, but everyone else that we meet is a Protestant Christian. They all know the Bible. Even the atheists know the Bible. And the people that we meet in this novel believe that they're doing God's will. The fact that they're gangsters doesn't seem to make any difference to them. Well, they are justified in the Lord. Jesse James, in this novel, he is a stylist. He is constantly stating facts, which are untrue. He's also what the English call a saloon bar Napoleon. He sounds like quite a bore. Been going on for an hour, 2 hours at a time about everything under the sun, getting all of these things wrong. There's a great deal of talk in this book about the assassination of President Garfield in 1881, and the man, an early sort of reality star, what's his name, Charles Guiteau, who killed him, disappointed office seeker, he's normally described as, that he used the notoriety of his Garfield lingered for about 2 weeks in horrible pain before dying. And Guiteau, he just spouted off to the whole world, and that he was somehow going to be justified too. And the newspapers were obsessed with this case, and Jesse James was obsessed with this case. Again, it's curious that the people in this novel routinely have very little, if any, education, but they seem to know more, and they are certainly much better spoken than people today. Of course, Jesse James's elder brother, Frank James, he was quite a Shakespeare buff. And I suppose if you have a grounding of Shakespeare and the King James Bible, you're certainly off to a very good start. The Pinkertons figure greatly in this novel, and the Pinkertons are kind of a private army. I talked about the Pinkertons when I discussed the biography of Andrew Carnegie a few months ago. There seemed to be very little restrictions on the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons could they could assault people, they could murder people, they could break strikes by any means necessary. They could attack innocent people, as happened to Jesse James' family. They could torture innocent people to get information. And certainly Missouri and much of the Midwest United States, I mean, just when we think of the Wild West, we typically think of the Far West, but much of the Midwest in those times, there's the law, but it is not very firmly applied, and there seems to be a great deal of, how would I say, variety in how it is applied, and it is applied by all sorts of different people, some of whom are simply looking for revenge, and some of whom are simply getting money, getting paid to do the bidding of rich men and politicians. And I suppose, one of the reasons that Jesse James became a hero and why there are so many outlaw heroes in American history is that the law was not the monolith then than it is today. That a criminal conviction today is typically a blight on a man's life for the rest of his life. That, he committed a crime, so we should stay away from him. We shouldn't hire him. We shouldn't come into personal contact. We wouldn't want him around younger people. It's really a mark of Cain. That was clearly not the case in 19th century America, and I don't believe that it was the case throughout almost all of human history. I mean, we're all sinners, and I mean, even before Christianity, people committed grievous crimes, and it was not the end of their public life. I just let me get to there. I wanted to say something about the style of this novel. It is very metaphor heavy, and it trades in the language of the time, which is not that much different from our own language, but some people may find that difficult. I would say that Hanson's use of metaphor is certainly lively and mostly successful. Metaphors are very tricky. A beautiful metaphor is a beautiful thing indeed, but a bad metaphor is a thing. It's a thing of horror. What was Jesse James in it for? Well, he talked about his family, and he talked about the cause and such like. But as this novel tells it, he was in it. He was in it for himself. And there is a scene in the novel where on Christmas Eve, Jesse steals from a church, which is about to have a sale, and including a Santa Claus outfit. Let's see. I'll read you from this. And this takes place in St. Joseph, Missouri, which is a town of 30,000 at the time, which was to Jesse James and his Confederates. It was a town of never-ending marvels. And Jesse James was constantly using pseudonyms, and including Thomas Howard. The Thomas Howard clan moved into the house on the hill on December the 24th, and in the late afternoon, Jesse and Charlie strolled downtown St. Joseph with a list Z had written out: candies and chocolates and peppermint canes, a cloth hand puppet with a porcelain head, ivory barrettes carved to represent angels, and 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew, a children's book by Margaret Sidney. Jesse bought what he could with the little cash he had. Then Charlie saw a notice that said the Second Presbyterian Church was holding its annual Christmas party that evening, and the two walked over to 12th Street, slipped into the unlocked basement, and stole a game of feathered darts, a green metal hoop and stick, a rubber ball and 6 jacks, a sack of popcorn balls that were covered with molasses, a reed whistle, and a red Santa Claus suit, and a white whisker set that was constructed from baling wire and painted binder twine. At nightfall, Charlie, Ford, cleaned the snow off his boots and softly knocked on the cottage door. Z opened it in her apron, a streak of flour on her cheek. She asked where Jessie was, and Charlie answered that the Turners had invited their new neighbor over for an eggnog. Then he sat with Tim. That was Jesse James' son. He was Jesse James Jr., but they called him Tim. Tim and Mary on the twin bed in the sitting room. He said, "Don't you wish Santa would come now instead of midnight when you're asleep?" Tim looked at Charlie with mistrust. "Yes. Let's squinch our eyes shut and wish that Santa would come right now." Charlie and Tim squinched their eyes, and Mary sucked her thumb, and then the kitchen door was slugged in, and sleigh bells jingled, and Santa Claus jollied into the sitting room, his red coat made fat with straw. He shouted, "Ho, ho, ho," in a voice that was low as a kettle drum, and seated himself on a wicker chair and bestowed sweets and toys to the children as Z reminded them of their manners and smiled. Tim collected his gifts within the metal hoop and then pestered Santa for more, investigating pockets, sticking his hands into straw, lifting the sides of the red coat until he contacted a Smith & Wesson revolver. The boy snatched his hand back as if it were burnt and scowled at the man in the red suit. "You're not Santa Claus, you're Daddy." Charlie called across the room, "He's one of Santa's helpers." Jesse sat low in the chair with his boots kicked out, drew off the soft red cap by its cotton ball, reached out and snuggled Tim close to his chest. He said, "Let me tell you a secret, son. There's always a mean old wolf in Grandma's bed and a worm inside the apple. There's always a daddy inside the Santa suit. It's a world of trickery." Quite the cynic, wouldn't you say? And rather a strange thing to say to a boy, a young boy. But the Jesse James of this novel, of Ron Hansen's novel, is self-pitying. That is perhaps the most important feature that he demonstrates. I want to read another passage for you, give you an idea of the. I mean, there's some writers who are good at description, and there's other writers that don't believe that description, particularly of faces, bodies, and the like, is all that important. Ron Hansen is an excellent at description, and so Jesse James is. It seems like he wants to murder everyone he's ever been involved with, because of his belief that they have betrayed him or they are going to betray him. And this is where Robert or Bob Ford comes in, that he appears in the novel as kind of a Jesse James groupie. And I use that word advisedly, not that there's anything sexual between them, but that young Bob Ford, who we learn is less than 20 years old, has made a study of Jesse James from the time that he was a young child. And he has an archive of information about Jesse James. And he has memorized places, names, dates. One might say that he, in some ways, he knows Jesse James better than he knows himself. And the question is, does he, or as Jesse James says in the novel, does he want to be like me, or does he want to be me? Jesse does not treat this young man very well. He's a very anxious, rather strange man. But the Jesse James of this novel is, he's fond of mocking and humiliating people. And I suppose one of the reasons he gets away with it is because he's very fast with a gun. And you want to laugh along with Jesse James, because if you don't, well, you might end up dead. And I'll read in a passage here. Dick Little recovered from the gunshot slowly because of maroon-colored infection that swelled from his thigh muscle like a split apple. But within a week of Jesse's visit, he had mended well enough to ride, and it became common for Dick and Bob to eat lunch in Richmond and clerk or play checkers at Elias Ford's grocery store. They claimed they were looking for income opportunities, but they also claimed prior commitments if work was offered. They made some vague inquiries about the James gang, the sheriff's office, Alan Pinkerton's detectives, and the manhunt for the perpetrators of the Winston and Blue Cut train robberies. And increasingly, Bob noticed a man alone at a cafe table, jotting notes in a journal, leaning on a pool cue and staring at Dick over the foam on a beer, or riding on a chestnut horse on the street and swiveling in his vast gray soldier's coat, to see them stamp the snow from their boots and walk into an apothecary. That means drugstore. At last at lunch at Christmas week, Bob carried a plate of pigeon pie over to a round rear table and cut the meat with a spoon as he measured the stern man sitting there. Compared to Bob, he was enormous. As tall as Frank James, but more muscular, 6'2" at a minimum, and wide as a gate in his shoulders and chest. He was exceptionally handsome in a foreign, somewhat villainous way. He looked like a circus lion tamer or the leering remittance man in a melodrama. His skin was as chestnut brown as his horse was. His mustache covered his mouth like a crow's wings, and his eyes evinced the black shimmer of coffee in a cup as they studied Bob with an arrogance that was close to animosity. Now, one of the problems of seeking to get people who have wronged you or may wrong you before they can wrong you is that everyone in that position is going to be looking for a way out. And this is what happens to Robert Ford. That everyone who's been associated, after the breakup of the original James Younger gang with the deaths of the Youngers, imprisonment and death of the Youngers, it seems that the next stage was far less lucrative, far more amateurish for Jesse James, and he, in a way, he dug his own grave. Because he was continually suspicious, but of course, it's useful to be suspicious. No honor among thieves, as they say. But Jesse James lost the ability to keep people close, and Robert Ford decided to get Jesse James, to bring him in before Jesse James shot him to death. I have to say that Ron Hansen is very good at describing violence, particularly how painful it is. And of course, much more painful before modern medicine, when people like Dick Little could be stumping around on a grossly infected leg that has, pus ball the size of an apple on it. That one gets the impression that men of that time, certainly men of that class, were far willing to put up with pain than men today. In fact, it seems to be simply not the done thing to complain about pain, because I suppose that the possibility of a life without pain, or even without constant pain, was not something that people thought about very much. But can I spoil the story of Jesse James and Robert Ford for you? I guess I will. It's one of the most famous stories in history. That Robert Ford, he makes an agreement with the local sheriff and with the governor of Missouri to bring in Jesse James. And it would appear that the agreement was dead or alive, and preferably dead. And he shoots Jesse James in the back. And of course, that makes Jesse James a hero, because, only a villain, a coward, would shoot someone in the back. Of course, people who get their ideas of the Old West from dime store novels or even movies. I don't know, to this day, they don't seem to understand that most people were shot in the back in those days. Or if you had an opportunity to shoot someone in the back, you would take it, because they can hardly shoot you when they've got their back to you. And so as to what Robert Ford thought that he would get out of this, well, it was $5,000 reward, and apparently he didn't get all of it. He was convicted of Jesse James' murder, but he was pardoned the same day. And he became a hated person, because he was the man who had brought down Jesse James. Now, I can only believe that there must have been, in large parts of America, a ferocious hatred of government at that time, of local government, of state government, or even of the federal government. This explains why outlaws were so admired, how outlaws found it so easy to find hiding places again and again and again, that there was just this hatred of government, that the government is good for nothing, that the government is looking to screw you over. So if you have a chance to help someone who is fighting the government or claims to be fighting the government, then you're duty bound to take that man's side. It's certainly a more interesting world than the world that we live in now. But I have to say, and I suppose it's a world that kept one on one's toes. This is quite a good novel, and it really brings you into the world of late mid-century 19th century Missouri. Highly recommended. Anyway, I'm going to have a final gaze at the chat here, and before I sign off. Okay, what else do we have here? Oh, mutatis mutandis. I love that saying. It means accounting for differences. Okay. After watching Dutton, I noticed spiteful mutants everywhere, says our moderator, Chad Chadson. Bob Ford was a bad guy, says D.B. Cooper. So was James, or James had physical courage, which was sort of redeeming. Well, it seems to me that willingly putting oneself in a room with Jesse James is showing physical courage. Actually, I was reminded of this line from Breaking Bad. You will remember it. The ugly ex-cop was supposed to be the conscience of this show, and he's the conscience in Better Call Saul. I forget his name, and he just doesn't like Walter White. He won't give Walter White credit for everything. After this spectacular coup pulled off by Walter White, he grumbles, just because you robbed a train doesn't make you Jesse James. Well, it does make you Jesse James. And, of course, thinking about Jesse James, Jesse James was the gentleman. He would never steal from Southerners, or he'd never steal from ladies. No, he would just stove the head in and shoot people, working at the boiler, the engine, of a train, porters, those sort of people. It's a dirty business. No question about it. Trump has just pardoned Roger Stone. Well, that is excellent news. Excellent news. Mate One is a great movie about killing Pinkerton in West Virginia, says Chogakin 666. I don't know, when I was younger, I had a sort of, reflexively, I would, support the cops. And then, the Pinkertons, they're cops. Well, not as we understand cops now. And again, when I read about Andrew Carnegie breaking the strike at his steelworks using the Pinkerton, I just thought, wow, rich men could get away with almost anything in those days. So what's coming up next week? We have a Western. And it takes place just after the Civil War ends. And it's about a soldier, an ex-soldier who fought for the Confederacy. And that soldier is played by John Wayne. And the film is by John Ford from 1956. It is called The Searchers. And on the book club, Alex Berenson. I've talked about him a lot on this show over the last few weeks. He's written a book about marijuana and why it is bad, especially for children. And the book is called Tell Your Children. Thanks so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like this show, I greatly appreciate donations, especially at this time. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. That's it for the week, and I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish my dear viewers and listeners that they manage to forge some kind of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.